Welcome back to DAGryffyn Hobby. My name's Dave. In this video, we're going to service the Postwar Lionel 736 Berkshire. I've done a video on this engine before, but that was possibly 2 years ago. So it was about time that it got another service. But why now? Well, somebody had asked me a question on Instagram about a problem they were having while servicing their 736 Berkshire. And I just couldn't remember what the inside of the engine really looked like. So I figured I could do two things at once. Make a new video, well, three things really. Make a new video, service my engine, and try to get them an answer. Their problem ended up being a missing clip on the armature shaft. So that was a pretty easy fix, at least I hope so. Let's go ahead and take a look at the 736 Berkshire. Just screw up top, you take that out and the boiler front comes off. Pop the headlight out. So we got some buildup here, probably from the smoke fluid. I was probably putting in too much smoke fluid, and it was just leaking out and building up. That's the only screw on top, so after you take that out, you can flip it over. Look at all this buildup down here. Yeah, I was definitely putting too much smoke fluid in this thing. Probably should only have like a drop or two. You have two screws at the back and one screw in the front. I pick the front up and slide it back. Oh, look at all that fuzz. Way too much smoke fluid. Well, it's a good thing I'm opening this up and clean that up. It's like it was snowing in here. I want to pop this plate out. It should just be, squeeze fit in there. So a little prying, a little wiggling, it should come out. And if you were just going to add some grease, you could add some grease, put that back on and be done with it. But we're going to take the motor off. Take the two screws out and keep in mind there should be a washer on each one. And then the motor should just lift out. Take the E-unit out. And you can move everything to the side. And as you can see, the only real portion of your drive assembly you can get to is the gear right here. I believe that's all there is. I think just the rear axle is driven. Everything else is just a slave. So there's not a whole lot to service on this one. It does look a little dirty, not just, lubricated, but a little dirty in there. Take the two screws off the brush plate. And before you go and just pull the brush plate off, you have to see how much play you have in the wire that's coming from the coil to the center point here. Because if it's not enough, you're going to end up breaking the wire. Well, at least the armature looks a little clean. Let's see, we got a little clip here. Pop that off. The washer. The bearing. Another washer. You can slide the whole armature shaft out. Then on the inside you have a washer. Here's the rest of the pieces. I knew they were somewhere. Another bearing and a washer. So you have a washer, a bearing, and a washer on each side. And on the outside edge, you have that clip. Now that this is a part, I have to go back and look at the question because I'm not sure I remember exactly what it is. I was looking at this solder point and it doesn't look great, so I'm going to desolder that just so I can also move all this and maybe clean the inside of the engine a little better. So then we have the wire from the center rail, wire to the light, and the wire to the smoke unit, which I am going to remove because it looks ridiculous. Two screws, each with a washer and a spacer. And the metal contact and the isolator. And this is why it's a good idea to take that apart. Look how greasy it is down there. It's not where you need grease. Too much grease and it can give you a short circuit. So we've got a gear here. Is there another gear there? And if so, how do I get to it? I guess I never took this one apart that far. Okay, so you take the screw out, the plate lifts up, the lever for the smoke unit comes out. There's no gear up front, there's a cam. And that cam pushes this up and down, which then causes the smoke lever to go up and down. Okay, that's good. The E-unit drum was filthy, so I sprayed it with some electronic cleaner and then put some on a Q-tip and kind of just scrubbed it up. Not perfect, I could probably use another drum, but it'll be fine for now. One washer on, the bearing, and the other washer. Put another drop of Labelle in there. Or two, and slide it in. Make sure it spins. Put a little Labelle in there. Washer, bearing, and washer. Put some more Labelle in there. The person that had contacted me, we figured out what they were missing was this clip. So everything else was in place, but the motor shaft would move back and forth, and that was causing everything to jam up. So this clip, very important. And then just snap it on, usually good. Put the brushes back in the brush plate, making sure they move freely. Slide the brush plate back on. And then I'll put some oil down in the access here in the top of the motor. Screw in the washer in. Can't forget these little spacers. They would be very easy to forget, I'm assuming, or lose, or break. Snug those down, make sure they're secure. None of your pieces fall out. Everything still rolls. It's always good to make sure everything still moves after you do something. You never know when you might accidentally introduce some interference. Now this could almost definitely use new rollers. You see how much they're worn in the middle. I don't have new rollers at the moment, so when I do, I'll put them on. Now, due to the design of the lamp on this is a perfect candidate for an LED. If you see, you could stick the LED inside and you're going to get a nice focused amount of light. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to put an LED in there, and I think that should be pretty cool. I'm just going to place the E-unit there for the moment because I still have to solder those wires. Before I put the motor back in, and put a generous amount of Labelle 106 down on that gear and on this one as well. I'm a fan of not over lubricating things, but down in here, I like to make sure there's a good amount of lubrication. Now, before you go and screw the motor back down, make sure the gears are properly meshed. You don't want to tighten these screws down with the gears not meshed properly. You're going to end up possibly damaging something, maybe breaking a tooth. So hold the front of the motor and then screw it in place. And once again, make sure everything still moves. I remember the first time that I worked on this plate was a real difficult part of it. It didn't want to come out, and once it did, it didn't want to go back in. But instead of arguing with it, it's not like it's a clearance thing. It's just there to keep everything from spraying out. I didn't want to replace the wire or pull the original sheathing completely off, but I had to add a little shrink tube on each end because it was fraying so much. When I first took it apart, this part didn't want to come out. It was seized in there because of all the excessive smoke fluid. So I took it out and cleaned it up, and it moves freely now. This is where the power comes up from the center roller. Now you can wire everything to that, or you can just wire that to the E unit and wire everything to the E unit. Really depends what's easier for you to do. I am most likely going to replace the wire, run a new wire from here to the E unit, and then wire anything else to the E unit. It just makes it easier in the future to unsolder that and take it off than try to get down here. I cleaned most of the smoke fluid residue off. I guess I could have done a better job. I soldered a new wire to the pickup and put an extra piece of shrink tube around it just to protect the top part where it's soldered. And I soldered that to the power point on the E unit. I then soldered the LED and the smoke unit to the power point on the E unit. And then I grounded the LED just to the spot here. I put a little fork on it, crimped it on there, and then screwed it down, and it works well. So at this point, I'm ready to go back together. Everything's been cleaned, lubricated, and put back together. I test ran it, and it's running pretty smooth. It's smoking, so everything works. Whether or not the smoke unit will continue working, I don't know. I'm going to let it go for a while without putting anything in it. Always remember to put this gasket back on. I cleaned that with a little electronic cleaner, and it seemed to take a lot of the junk out of it. I cleaned up the shell a little bit, washed it with some diluted dish soap, and then rubbed a very little bit of, actually, the Labelle 102 into it. In the past, I had done WD-40, but I feel like that ends up leaving a residue, and I recently kind of restored a box car with it, Labelle oil. I had washed the box car, and it dried out the shell, and it was all splotchy and pale. And then I took a very little bit of Labelle and kind of worked it into the surface on one spot of it, and it looked good. So I ended up doing the whole car with that, and it really brought it back nicely. So this is the first time I tried it with the shell. I'll probably let it sit for a little bit longer and then wipe it down again. But for the time being, I can put it back together. You gotta feed the motor through the back, feed the LED through the front. Okay, so the shell is situated, the LED is out the front, the wires aren't pinched. Flip it over, put the screws back in. It looks like one of the screws is just a touch longer than the others, so I'm going to put that up front. The LED should just stick in there and stay where it is. I put some extra shrink tube around it so that it would fit nicely right there in the lens. The nice thing about the LED in the lens itself instead of inside is that you may have noticed sometimes when you have these boiler fronts that open that you'll see light around it, and that always kind of annoyed me. So now I won't have that because the light is completely encased in the lens. And of course, now I remember why I don't put the handrails on last, because they're impossible to get into the hole on the pilot when it's all attached. So I'll have to loosen that up and then secure the handrails. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time on DAGryffyn Hobby.